Welcome to episode 506 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Meyers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I am interviewing Joe Cornet, who just directed a horror film called Night of the Caregiver. So we talk about that and how that project came together for him, but we also talk about some of his earlier films as well. Like a lot of people, he started out working in another whole industry outside of entertainment, but was always drawn to it. So he started out by independently producing a Western, which is never easy on any budget, but especially a low budget. And he continued to produce other Western films as well. So we dig into that a little bit, exactly how he was able to put some of these low budget Western films together, which I think is a really interesting case study. So stay tuned for that interview. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking or sharing it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast, and then just look for episode 506. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. I'll teach you how to write a professional logline inquiry letter and how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I am interviewing writer, director, producer, actor Joe Cornet. Here is the interview. Welcome, Joe, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
Hello. Nice to be on here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. So to start out, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up and how did you get interested in the entertainment business?
Well, I grew up in Pasadena, California, which is oddly where I am back at now, and where I am coming to you from. And I always had a interest in film dating back to probably the time I was 12, 13 years of age, even before then. And I watched a lot of Westerns in those days and through my teen years. And I really didn't get into this game seriously until about, I guess it was about 2015, 2014. And when I started, I had been writing for some time. And I was in a completely different business. I was in property development, commercial property development for many years. And I got out of that, thank God. And I sat around for a year, and I remember, when I'm going to show you a little visual here. When I was about 15, this was my second camera.
Huh.
It was sound, as you could see,
Mm-hmm.
a Kodak Ectosound. And I took this thing with me everywhere, and I filmed everything, and I made, as any wannabe filmmaker does, little short films and fun films with my high school buddies and all that. And then it all kind of went by the wayside by my early 20s. And I certainly had an interest in film and film history, but I never really did anything about it until after I got out of the real estate business and focused on just trying to create something. And I started writing. And I took a lot of classes and acting classes and writing classes and other filmmaking things. And I just kind of just started doing it. And of course, like all of us, we start and we make shorts and we desperately hope that someone will watch it on YouTube or something like that. But that morphed into, my first feature, which I wrote, which was A Prayer for the Damned. And lo and behold, I got a distribution deal. And then I made my second film, which was also a Western, which I also wrote, which is the one behind me here. And that got a distribution deal. And then I had a third one, which I had actually written sometime in 2014, and I rewrote the whole thing from top to bottom. And that was my third one, which actually, all three of these films won me some awards at various festivals. This one won the most. And then that got me introduced to Alexander Nevsky, who was producing, directing, and starring in his own pictures for at least a decade by that point. And he and I just hit it off immediately. And somehow I talked him into doing a Western. Now here's this bodybuilder that's known for action movies and acting with all these other action hero guys. And I did not write that screenplay, but the great Craig Hammond wrote the screenplay to Gunfight at Rio Bravo, which we released in January of this year. And then shortly thereafter, when we completed production on that, Alexander came to me and said, "How do you feel about horror films?" I said, "Well, yeah, I like them, but no zombies. I don't have anything more to say about zombies. I don't think anyone, it's been done." And he goes, no, it's a film about the paranormal and demons and Satanism and things like that. And I said, "Oh," and he goes, "And I want you to do it in the style of Dario Argento." I go, "Got it. Okay. Done. Let's do it."
So let me back up. Let me just back up a little bit there and just go back, because I'm real curious. Here at Selling Your Screenplay, one of the big things that I sort of promote and try and get screenwriters to do is to write something low budget that can be shot easily. I feel like there's a good market for these types of scripts, especially for beginning screenwriters. And one of the things I sort of tell them to avoid would be precisely what you did, which is Westerns with horses and guns and these sorts of stuff. So maybe you can talk through that a little bit. You're doing your first film, Prayer for the Damned. Just give us the 2-minute spiel. Number one, why did you choose a movie that, it wasn't a horror movie, a contained horror movie like Night of the Caregiver? It was a much more, complicated production. So why did you go in that direction? Was it just a love of this? And did you have experience with horses and guns that you felt you could lean into this?
Well, the reason I went that way, number one, was obviously my sheer love of the Western genre. But I had an incredible advantage in that I had friends, acquaintances, fellow actors that knew about horses, that knew about the guns of that era, that owned guns of that era. So I had access to this, and I was very, very lucky from the very beginning to get a location such as White Horse Ranch, which is where we filmed the first 3 Westerns at, which is a marvelous, fully set-dressed Western town out by Landers, California. And it's just an amazing set. And I had access to all of this, and I had access to the props, and I had access to costumes and the weaponry and the right down to the art direction. I was lucky because I had all this. And so I thought, why not? And obviously you could see a vast difference between my first Western and my third and my fourth, because the third and the fourth really opened up and were big, because I had bigger budgets and more to work with.
How did you get this access? Like you had access to, was it just networking in living in Pasadena? You knew a lot of actors just over the years, you accumulated these friends.
I did, and I knew several people from various acting classes. One of the best ones I ever took was the great Clu Gulager, who was a very famous actor since the mid-1950s. He unfortunately passed away last summer, and he was a tremendous influence on me. And he is the one that actually encouraged me to pursue this to the degree that I pursued it. And he, of course, was famous for making a number of Westerns himself, and on TV, as well as features. And anyway, he was a big influence. You're absolutely right, though, about one thing. With the screenwriting process, it's a great idea to tailor it to do exactly what you just enumerated, which is to, like, what is my actual budget? Where can I film this? Who can I have in this? And I'll give you a case in point. Here's a script I wrote in 2013 called Kaleidoscope. and it's my attempt at a Hitchcockian thriller. It's set in the late 1960s. And I wrote it at the time. It's been extensively rewritten, but I wrote it at the time with all of what I had available to me in mind, which included a lot of mid-century modern houses and different retro-looking office interiors and things like that. And I kept it real tight. I didn't have, I had access to some vintage cars, of course, at that time, but it's been refined. But even though it's been refined and enhanced and made a better story than what I had it originally, even, it is still, even now, with that thought in mind, because whenever you do a period piece, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to pull it off, if at all, because a lot of things that I see that are period pieces just don't look period. The people aren't talking in the right cadence. They're not talking the right language. The backgrounds are obviously from a different era other than, so you have that. So yes, that is key. Figure out what you have available, who you have available, where you can do this, what your budget is, and write to that, tailor it to that. I still do that.
On this first one, Prayer of the Damned, how did you go about raising money for something like that when you didn't have a track record of making films, starring in films, directing films? Just for the newbies out there that they've got a script and they want to get this thing into production. Maybe you can offer a little insight into that. How do you get something into production when you don't have a great track record or any track record?
This is rare and unique, and it doesn't often happen, but I financed it myself. And that was a pretty low budget. But I financed it with my own money, and I financed basically the first three with my own money. Okay. Once I got it into a distribution deal, then it got out there, and then people started watching, and I started getting my money back. Now that's a very rare case, as you will probably agree with. But I definitely decided, what am I going to spend the money on? So in the case of the first Western, I thought, okay, the key is the look. It has to be really great. So I didn't think twice about spending money on the location or on the costumes or on the rental of the horses, for instance. I now have my own horse and have had for several years. So I like to ride her in my movies if I do Westerns. But I just chose very cautiously what I would do. And of course, at that time, I had a lot of starving actor friends who would work for food and booze in a motel room. Okay.
Yeah, gotcha.
So let's a little bit more, but so.
Yeah. So let's dig into your latest film, Night of the Caregiver. Maybe to start out, you can give us a quick picture log line. What is this new film all about?
A hospice nurse is sent to an overnight call at this house that's out in the middle of the boonies, far away from civilization. She gets there. She's greeted by this very friendly, kindly, elderly lady who is a terminal case. And she gives the nurse, played by Natalie Denise Sperl, who is fantastic in it, and Eileen Dietz, who played Pazuzu in The Exorcist, Billy Friedkin's original, plays the elderly lady. And so she gives her cookies, and she's very kind, but there's something that's off about all of this. If you look at the art direction in this film, there's a scene between the two of them in her kitchen at the very early part of the picture, and there's something that's not quite right. You look at the things that are in the kitchen, and they're not really of the time of the current era that we're in. There's something off, and one thing leads to another, and then all of a sudden it takes this terrible turn, and bad things happen. And
so it sounds like you got the script through this partner, Alexander Nevsky, and we've actually had him on the podcast. It was a number of years ago. I'll have to round that up. So he brings you the script, and then you read it. Maybe you can tell us some of your initial reactions, especially as a writer yourself. You read the script. What were some of the things that really drew you to it? Some things that you liked, and maybe just for our screenwriting audience, what are those things that drew a director like you into this project?
Well, what interested me was the way he sort of pitched it to me was after I said, when he said horror film, let's do a horror film. And I said, it's not a zombie movie, is it? And he goes, no, 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 it's paranormal and it's deeply psychologically based. And I said, okay. And he said, Alexander said to me, I would like you to approach this in the style of, think of Dario Argento. And that was the great hook for me. And so I read this script, and there's definitely elements of the great moments in an Argento movie in it. Mm-hmm. That's for sure. So that's what drew me to it.
Were there some things on the flip side of that those are the things you liked? Were there some things that you thought needed to be changed a little bit? And maybe you can work through that. Was there some development that you guys did on the script once you became involved?
Well, there was some tweaking of the script with writer Craig, that's for sure. But nothing major was really changed. This script was written during the first phase of the early days of the pandemic, and it was written kind of, Alexander was looking for something to do, Craig was looking for something to do, and they got together. I got an idea for a horror movie. Let's see if we could put together a script, and when everything opens up again, we'll do this. But it kind of sat around for a couple of years, you see. And then we made our Western together, and not that much had to be done to it. There was some polish, of course. And the only thing that was really different was we filmed about 3 endings, which are all kind of very similar, but we filmed it 3 different ways, and we went with the ending that the audience will see, and we felt that was the best choice. That was the only real change, but it was all in there. It was the great characters were in there. Their development, their backstories, everything was in there.
So maybe you can talk about that process of working with a writer. Are there some tips you can give to people? I mean, most people listening to this are themselves writers. Are there some tips you can give them when they have a script and it's been submitted to a director and the director is coming back with some notes? Maybe there's a few tips you can take. And as a writer yourself, certainly you've gotten criticism and feedback. How do you take that harsh feedback sometimes? How do you take feedback sometimes that you just don't agree with, even though the director and the producer might be telling you, no, this is what we need to do to get it into production?
Well, there's always harsh feedback, and you always get that. And this business is just full of negativity. In fact, I really believe in, positivity. And when you run into a situation like that, you try to turn around and make the best of it. It's like, as a director, there are always challenges. There's always something that happens that you can't anticipate. So you could either get angry, get temperamental, and turn into a tyrant, or you could just say, okay, let's shoot something else this day, or let's approach it differently. And so when a director comes to you as a writer and says, you know what, I don't like this, find out why, and ask him what it is that he or she doesn't like about it. And ask him, well, could you consider this approach? I mean, obviously I wrote the first 3 films that I directed, and then the next 3, Craig Hammond wrote. But Craig and I have a great positive working relationship. And if I want to change something, which is very rare, I'll just talk about it with him, and I'll be very respectful, because they're his words, and I respect that. And I don't really like to get into it with a screenwriter, because I figure that my job is kind of like to present his vision, hopefully. And I think if you take it from a positive, if this makes any sense, from a positive point of, okay, well, how can we work through this? How can we make this better? Can you consider this? And I'm taking it from the writer's standpoint.
Gotcha. So maybe you can talk about just sort of your process. You're coming on to direct this. Are there some other movies you looked at? And just how do you sort of figure out where your movie is going to fit in sort of the canon of these types of horror movies? And I'm just sort of curious of your process. A lot of directors, writers, they might go back and watch a bunch of movies. And what were some of those movies? And just sort of what is that process of sort of just landing your project in sort of the pantheon of great films that have been made?
Well, first of all, you have to be flexible, meaning that you could be absolutely just smitten with a screenplay and just really into the idea of doing that, and something will happen that'll come along, and something else will come along, and you say, okay, well, I'm flipping this. I'm doing this one and first and this one later. And you have situations like that. And with Caregiver, I think I really did want to do an homage to Argento with a little bit of feel of Friedkin. And I wanted to make it different. I wanted it to be classy, meaning I didn't want it to get guttural and visceral and just do the same old thing. I have no problem with any of that, but I just wanted to do something that would hopefully set this apart and would confuse at the beginning the audience as to where this is going, which I think we did, because I've been told in the last few days since it came out, where it went story-wise was not where we expected it to go, which is a great compliment. So I like, in the pantheon of great horror movies, my style is certainly The Shining, The Exorcist, any of the Argento films, even his detective movies, the first two. Definitely The Haunting, the original, the Robert Wise production, The Omen.
Yeah, some real classics.
Yeah.
And maybe you can talk just briefly sort of about the economics of something like this, especially since you've been through it now with a number of films. Did you guys have a distributor set up? Did you go to film festivals? There's certainly a whole horror cottage industry of Comic Con or horror cons and horror film festivals. Just maybe you can talk about a little bit about your approach to actually recoup this money. What was sort of your marketing strategy? How did you guys go about this? And again, you guys have so much experience. I'm sure there was talks with distributors, but maybe just walk us through that. Once you had the film done, what were those next steps like?
Well, remember, we had just come out of making a Western, which we had finished, we had delivered to our current distributor. And they were very happy with us. And so we weren't really certain, and no one is ever certain that there's going to be that deal at the end of the line. Just because you complete a movie doesn't mean it's guaranteed to get out there. There's a big struggle for that. So the idea is, how do you then transform? Because we were promoting a Western with a sequel in mind, which we also have in the can, will be released very soon in the upcoming months. But we were in that mode. Okay, now shift gears, we're in the horror film mode. So, you talk to a whole different demographic of people in horror than you do in the Western genre. So we geared up for that. And we have been talking a lot on various podcasts and YouTubers that do this kind of thing. And happily, the distributor that we have was very happy to release it, and they enjoyed it, and they had some input for editing and so forth. And we made minor touches here and there based on their ability to sell it, which they did very effectively, I might add.
So I just like to wrap up the interviews by asking the guests if there's anything you've seen recently that you can recommend to our mostly screenwriting audience, Netflix, HBO, Hulu, anything you're watching that you think is really good.
I think there's one thing that I think is really good, and it's on Apple TV, and it's a show called Physical.
And I've not seen it.
And it's very funny, and it is very clever, and it is very well written. And we're in season 3 now, and it's very well done, and it's very watchable. And as I said, it's very funny. The acting is fantastic in it.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a great recommendation. I have not seen that, so I'll have to check that one out. What's the best way for people to keep up with what you're doing? Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, anything you're comfortable sharing, I will round up for the show notes so people can click over to it.
You could find me and everything I'm doing on Facebook. Just go to Joe Cornet, Joe, Joe, Cornet. Just look me up and you'll find me. On Instagram, I'm San Rafael Productions, SANRAFAEL Productions, all run together. So you could find me there, and I, if you punch me in on YouTube, there's all kinds of interviews floating around of stuff I've done and what have you. So.
Perfect. And how can people see Night of the Caregiver? Do you know what the release schedule is going to be like for it?
It was released 2 days ago. I
Okay.
know for a fact it's on Vudu. I know a bunch of people have watched it on that. It's supposed to have other platforms. It's going to get a secondary release, a wider release with DVD and all that good stuff in, I think, first part of October.
Okay.
And we'll
Perfect.
probably have a major screening of it at that time too.
Okay. Perfect. Perfect. Well, Joe, I really appreciate you coming
It
on
is
the
in
show.
limited theaters right now. I can't
Okay.
tell you where though. I don't have the schedule, but it is
Gotcha.
in limited
Gotcha.
theaters.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, people can take a look at their local area. Well, Joe, again, I really appreciate you coming on the show with me. Thanks for talking about this film. Good luck with this film, and good luck with all your future films as well.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being on here. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Okay. Bye bye.
I just want to talk quickly about SYS Select. It's a service for screenwriters to help them sell their screenplays and get writing assignments. The first part of the service is the SYS Select Screenplay Database. Screenwriters upload their screenplays along with a logline, synopsis, and other pertinent information like budget and genre, and then producers search for and hopefully find screenplays they want to produce. Dozens of producers are in the system looking for screenplays right now. There have been a number of success stories come out of the service. You can find out about all the SYS Select successes by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/success. Also on SYS podcast episode 222, I talked with Steve Deering, who was the first official success story to come out of the SYS Select database. When you join SYS Select, you get access to the screenplay database along with all the other services that we're providing to SYS Select members. These services include the newsletter. This monthly newsletter goes out to a list of over 400 producers who are actively seeking writers and screenplays. Each SYS Select member can pitch one screenplay in this monthly newsletter. We also provide screenwriting leads. We have partnered with one of the premier paid screenwriting leads services, so I can syndicate their leads to SYS Select members. There are lots of great paid leads coming in each week from our partner. Recently, we've been getting 5 to 10 high-quality paid leads per week. These leads run the gamut. There's producers looking for a specific type of spec script to producers looking to hire a screenwriter to write up one of their ideas or properties. They're looking for shorts, features, TV, and web series pilots, all types of projects. If you sign up for SYS Select, you'll get these leads emailed directly to you several times per week. Also, you get access to the SYS Select forum, where we will help you with your logline and query letter and answer any screenwriting related questions that you might have. We also have a number of screenwriting classes that are recorded and available in the SYS Select forum. These are all the classes that I've done over the years, so you'll have access to those whenever you want once you join. The classes cover every part of writing your screenplay, from concept to outlining to the first act, second act, third act, as well as other topics like writing short films and pitching your projects in person. Once again, if this sounds like something you'd like to learn more about, please go to sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. Again, that is sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. On the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing Connor Allen, who just did a period feature called In the Fire, starring Amber Heard. He's another very interesting indie filmmaker, like Joe, who I talked with today. He's out there doing low-budget indie films, but they're not the typical horror or thriller indies that we see so often. He's doing historical period pieces like In the Fire, and has done some indie war films. Again, not the typical type of films that we see coming from indie directors and producers. So we'll talk about all of this next week. Connor gives some great insight in how he was able to put some of these films together. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. That's our show. Thank you for listening.